then instruction of the Lord. The thing that's going to instruct our kids more than anything else, and you guys know this, is our actions, right? If we go to church and we pretend like, oh yeah, God's really, really important, and then we watch horrific things on the TV, or we're just constantly at home complaining about everything. Oh, you should be thankful. Be thankful, kid. You have whatever, food and shelter. Be thankful. But then we're just like, everything sucks for me. What will your kid learn? They're not going to learn to be thankful, right? They're going to learn to be a hypocrite. They're going to learn that dad pretends to be thankful at church, and then he comes home and the real guy comes out. Right? So again, what does James say? That we take the word and we apply it to our lives. So the best way to be dads are to be dads that are applying the word to our lives. And so sometimes when we make mistakes at dad, if we provoke our children to anger, if we're unjust or we do something, we need to go back to them and say, hey, I was wrong. You know, when I came home and I had that little rager, that was wrong. Please forgive me for that. That's not who Jesus is. I don't want to be that way. Right? It doesn't, again, at no point are we saying that obedience becomes negotiation. So don't think because we're Paul, I'm saying, hey, be humble. That somehow means like I remember years ago, I was in an airport about 6 a.m, best time to have kids. But I was by myself at an airport about 6 a.m, and there was this couple, and you ever walked into an airport terminal and there's just 0 seats? Not even like an awkward one next to someone where you're like, oh, sorry, our thighs are touching, but I want to sit down, kind of a thing. So it's just, just that kind of thing. And so I sit on the floor, and I'm kind of sitting against this concrete pillar, and there's a family. It's a husband, a wife, well, a mom and a dad, and a child. He's about 3 years old. And the dad is talking to the child because the child's having a freak out, and he's just basically complaining about something. I can't remember what it was. But he's being loud about it, being vocal. And the dad is talking to him, and he's like, now, mommy and daddy are really tired. And if you could just be a little quieter, mommy and daddy would really appreciate it. And I'm like, that's going to work great. It's one of those scenarios where like you do feel bad for the parents. I'm not saying that that's probably biblical or excellent parenting, because the reality is we all know your 3-year-old kid, he doesn't care how you feel. And if your 3-year-old kid had 18-year-old strength, he would take the lollipop and kick the poop out of you. And we all know it, right? We've all seen kids running away with the lollipop trying to swat their parents from behind, You're like, you're 3. I could boot you across the parking lot. But they don't. They're just like, ah. So that's what they are. And it was really funny because they're trying to reason with him, and he's just getting louder. Every time they try, he's just getting louder and louder. And this was in the Georgia airport. And I think they have kind of a different philosophy of parenting in Georgia than we do out here on this place. And because I don't know, probably like a late 50s, mid 60s lady walked up, and she just goes, boy, you just need to whip his fill in the blank. And they like kind of looked up at this lady, and she's just like, It was full Southern mode, And I was like, why do I not live here? No, I didn't. And at the end, you're like, I feel like it's somewhere in between, probably, right? You're not just like whooping everybody all the time, but trying to like reason with a 3-year-old and like give them that, like that's probably not going to work, right? So there's a middle ground where we're exercising wisdom, where there can be humility, but there can be reality. And so please don't mistake anything I'm saying to mean we don't, as parents, enforce obedience, because we do, and we need to. And really the happiest kids are kids that know boundaries. That they know, like, this is where safe zone is. And I can do whatever I want here, and it's great. And I know that my parents are going to keep me secure. They have security from me. And there's a lot to be said about biblical wisdom in raising a child. But we don't want to let testosterone or this world, is whether they're more passive or more aggressive methods of this world or of our own flesh, taint how we raise and encourage our kids. We want to walk with the Lord as dads, have a real walk with God, a real, honest walk with God. That I talk to him, he talks to me, because we cannot instill in our children a real walk with God if we don't. All we can instill is making them do what we think they should do. That's all we can instill outside of a walk with God. And we want to do so much more than that, don't we? We want to encourage them. We want them to know God. So anyway, don't exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So we're going to bring them up in the instruction by example, right? And then we're also, maybe we have Bible studies. Maybe we encourage them to get into the Word. I know we haven't done it for a very long time. I don't know why it stopped. Probably summer. Summer seems to stop everything. But, one of the things that I did probably way later than I should have is we just had family devotions for like 15 minutes. And it wasn't like everybody sit down and Pastor Dad will train you. We just all brought our Bibles out to the table or whatever, and we just read for 15 minutes. And the crazy thing was, I got positive feedback from the whole family. I was like super encouraged too. I was like, wow, this has been really great. Why did I wait for like 15 years to install this, or whatever it was, 12 years to install this? So there's going to be time where, we're encouraging them to have a time with the Lord. But, if we don't read the Bible as dads, let's just be honest. Trying to be like, go read the Bible, it's a joke. If I don't value it, they're going to see that, and they're not going to value it. Now, can God do a work? Sure, he can do a work. But it's going to be an easier work, and it's going to, I think, in general, a more effective work if we're the ones that are partaking in the same thing as dads, and we're leading in those ways. All right, verse 5. Now he's going to go on to something, again, context. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord and not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever they do, whether they are, reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way and do not threaten them. Their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So, in the Roman Empire, for all 800 or so years that it existed, they estimate that the Romans had about 60 million slaves over the course of the empire. And the slaves were mostly derived from conquered peoples, Germania, everywhere they went, everywhere they conquered. They would essentially take a huge swath of people back to Rome and parade them through Rome and demonstrate their army's basically dominance to their citizens. And so it was very commonplace. The Roman slaves were treated very poorly. There's crazy laws, and that's part of the context that we need to think about here. For example, if you were a slave owner and you committed some sort of crime that was worthy of death, you could actually just hand over one of your slaves to the government. And the government would execute that slave, and they would consider that to be justice, right? So some very twisted, some very gnarly stuff. So you might ask, why doesn't the Holy Spirit inspire Paul to say, slaves, rebel and just get out of there and make sure you're free, and this is horrible and this is terrible? Why doesn't he write that? Why doesn't he say that? Because every slave would have been killed. It's just, there's no due process in first century Rome. There's no appealing to a constitution in first century Rome. There's nothing like that. If a Roman soldier, especially like well, this is Ephesus, so it was definitely a much more Roman place, but when you start looking at the more like Jerusalem and anywhere in the kind of the more Middle East area rather than Asia Minor, it was not abnormal to be slain by the Roman government, by a soldier. Just you got in their way. You said the wrong thing. You smarted off to them. Just to be run through on the spot. So when Paul's writing to them, and also I think there's this kind of idea, and I don't know where it came from, but we kind of live it in our society right now, And I think we relate to things in this idea where we can, you guys, you're familiar with macro and micro, right? Macro being big and micro being small. Where we have this idea now where we can change macro problems, massive problems in our society by just kind of like shouting out our opinions into a kind of, bubble that we live in, right? And computer programmers and Google folk, they're really smart. So they know what we look at. They know, they track, like for example, Facebook tracks every second that you spend on any image. So if you pause over an image, even if you don't click on it, they know how long you paused on it. So if you paused over an image for 15 to 20 seconds, they know that you read something or that you looked at something. And when you scroll through that, you see more and more and more. So if you're like, why do I always see these things? Even if they don't know that, just based on your age or demographic, as soon as you sign up, they will start sending you stuff and advertisements and so forth that your age and demographic generally want to see, right? And so because of that, in our onlineosphere, most of the things we see are things that we agree with, right? And so the weird thing that's happening right now is we comment on things, we rage about things, we get on internet arguments about things and all these things. And some of us, I think, have kind of, that's how we're going to bring change. That we'll bring change in our nation, in our county, whatever it is, by getting aggressive online. And has that changed anything? Not really, right? It just makes for some good depression and anxiety for the rest of the night, after you've attempted it. When you look at Rome, and really if you look at Rome, if you look at North Africa, if you look at Turkey and Asia, what used to be Asia Minor, all these places, you know what brought radical change? If you kind of go through history, what brought an appreciation for life? It was Christianity. That's what brought it. Anywhere Christianity spread to and took hold, in general, appreciation for life occurred. But it never happened through legislation. It never did. In Rome, there was no legislation that got passed. So we've talked about, and again, I didn't mention this in the father's part, I forgot about it, but in Rome, lawfully, the father had the final authority in everything in his home, by the law. So for example, if your wife, as a father, if your wife gave birth, it was custom and law that if you did not pick up that child, it was rejected for your home, and it was either thrown away, literally, or it was placed out. They had kind of this place outside the walls of Rome and other Roman cities where you would just leave the kid there, and it would just die from exposure. So human beings have been dealing with inconvenient children like that for pretty much all of history. So as a father, you could make that decision, and there was nothing that your family could do about it, which is one of the reasons he's also exhorting fathers, like, stop acting like your culture and start acting like Jesus. But it's in that same culture, what happened was Christians started going to those places and taking the children. Another example of where Christians began to be a force for change with zero laws being passed is the gladiators. In about 406, 409 AD, there was an Eastern Orthodox monk named Malachi or Melati, something like that. And he was on a pilgrimage to Rome, and he ended up in the Colosseum seeing a gladiator fight, and he jumped into the arena, jumped onto the sand. And he started preaching to the people how barbaric and how horrible it was. And so the Caesar of the day ordered the gladiators to kill him. And so they did. They stabbed him on the spot. And then the people rained down anything at their disposal and started basically just covered him in stones to kind of finish him off. And it wouldn't be long after that till the heart of the people realized the violence that it really was barbaric, and they never had gladiators again until a couple hundred years where another Caesar. So there was no voting. There was no law. They didn't picket in front of it would have been killed. There was no I'm not making any political commentary here about protests or whatever. I'm just saying that there was no overt action against the government. And it changed. And so a lot of us, we want to see change in our families. We want to see change in our country. It's not going to happen by shouting into some sort of online stratosphere or even shouting in downtown. It's not going to happen. You know how moral change and God's goodness is going to be more evident in this life? When you and I go out and we love the person in front of us. That's how we're going to see change. Throughout all of history, in some of the most rancid conditions in history, came life and love and care and the rule of Christ, if you will, through people that just loved other people through the blood of Jesus. And did say, like, that's bad. It's bad that you're taking two people and sticking them in an arena to try to kill each other for sport. That's bad. And through the power of God's Spirit in an individual and in Christians, Rome changed in a lot of ways. Babies survived, had good upbringings. People stopped killing themselves for sport, spilling blood for sport. Because individuals just decided to live in this way, to live in a way that was humble, that gave worth to God and what He says.